Your uncle means well, that's the part that makes it hard. He's sitting across from you at the dinner table, fork in hand, and he says it the way people say things when they genuinely want to help. You know, when I was your age, I already owned a house. He's not bragging, he's trying to give you something, a map, a proof that it's possible. And somewhere in the back of your head, a quiet voice answers back, not out loud, never out loud, that says, okay, but you were 28 in 1991. That voice doesn't say it because you're ungrateful, it says it because you've done the math. Because you've sat with the numbers late at night the way people sit with something they can't quite make sense of. And you've started to wonder if maybe the map your uncle is handing you was drawn for a completely different city. This video is about that gap, not the gap between what you earn and what you spend, the gap between the advice you were given and the world that advice was built for. Because here's what nobody says out loud at the dinner table. The rules didn't just get harder, the rules changed, and most people handing out advice haven't noticed yet. Let's start with a number. In 1990, the average home price in Toronto was roughly $255,000. The average household income at the time was around $54,000 a year. If you divide those two numbers, you get a ratio of about 4.7, meaning a home cost roughly 4.7 times what a household earned in a year. Difficult, but reachable. A 10-year plan with discipline and some luck. Now look at 2025. The average home price in Toronto sits above $1,050,000. The average household income has climbed to around $100,000. You divide those two numbers and you get a ratio of more than 10. The same calculation, a completely different answer, and the gap between 4.7 and 10 is not a gap you close by cutting subscriptions or making coffee at home. It is a structural shift. It happens slowly and then all at once, and now it just is. But housing is only one wall of the box. There are two others that don't get talked about in the same sentence, and they should. Student debt in Canada has roughly doubled in the past 15 years. The average graduate today enters the workforce carrying somewhere between $28,000 and $30,000 in federal and provincial student loans. Some carry significantly more. And this matters not just because of the monthly payment, though the monthly payment is real, but because of what it means for the starting line. Your parents walked onto a track and started running. You walked onto the same track, but you started 30 meters behind, and the coaches on the sideline keep telling you to run faster. Then there is the third wall, the one that's hardest to see because it doesn't look like a problem. It looks like freedom. The rise of contract work, freelance income, gig employment. More Canadians than ever are working without employer pensions, without benefits packages, without the automatic safety nets that previous generations mostly didn't have to think about. Those things existed, they were just there. Today, if you want a safety net, you build it yourself. Out of the same income that's already stretched across rent and food and debt payments. You are expected to provide for yourself what the previous generation received as a condition of employment, and somehow that's framed as flexibility. Three walls, housing, debt, the disappearance of institutional support. Your parents, if they struggled financially, were usually fighting one of those things at a time. You are fighting all three simultaneously. That is not a personal failing, that is a structural reality. And the fact that it's rarely named clearly is itself part of the problem. Now here's the part that tends to make people angry. And it should. There is a specific piece of financial advice that has circulated for so long that most people treat it as truth. You've heard it. You've heard the idea that if young people just stopped buying coffee, stopped spending on small luxuries, stopped eating out, stopped living like they had any room to breathe, they would have enough money to buy a home. The latte factor. The avocado toast. Whatever form it takes in a given year, the logic is always the same. Your financial situation is a discipline problem. Fix the discipline, fix the outcome. Let's run the actual numbers. A coffee from a cafe costs roughly $7 in most Canadian cities right now. $7 a day, every day, is $2,555 a year. A 20% down payment on a home at the Toronto average price of $1,050,000 is $210,000. At the rate of $2,555 per year, it would take you 82 years to save that down payment, without accounting for inflation. Without accounting for the fact that home prices have historically continued to rise. Without accounting for the fact that you also need to eat, This is not math. This is a story being told to you about yourself. And the story is, you are the problem. Your choices are the problem. Your coffee is the problem. And as long as you believe that story, you will not look at housing policy. You will not look at wage stagnation. You will not look at the tax treatment of investment properties versus primary residences. You will look at the cup in your hand. The latte factor is not financial advice, it is misdirection. And it has worked remarkably well for a remarkably long time. Here is what the misdirection hides. The reason home prices in Toronto and Vancouver have disconnected from local incomes is not complicated. It is a function of what happened when real estate stopped being primarily a place to live and started being primarily an investment vehicle. When that shift happens, when a home becomes an asset class, the price is no longer set by what local workers can afford. It's set by what investors can afford, and investors are competing globally, not locally. You are not competing with your neighbor for that house on Maple Street, you are competing with capital flows. That is a different competition, and showing up to it with better discipline is not going to change the outcome. This is not an argument for despair. It is an argument for seeing clearly. Because here's what happens when you don't see clearly. You spend your 30s blaming yourself for a result that was largely written before you started. You internalize the gap between the plan and the outcome as a personal failure. And personal failure is exhausting in a way that systemic clarity is not. Systemic clarity is cold, but it is not exhausting. It frees up energy, and energy is what you actually need right now. Because some people in your generation are navigating this, not easily, not the way your uncle described, but they are finding footholds, and the pattern, when you look at it, is consistent. They are not playing the old game better, they are playing a different game. The old game was one income, save for a few years, buy a house, build equity, retire. That game still exists, it's just not accessible to most people in major Canadian cities anymore. The people who are making it work are doing something else. They are doubling up, two incomes treated as one, with the second income going entirely towards savings and down payment. Not as a sacrifice, as a strategy. They are using the FHSA. The First Home Savings Account was introduced in 2023, and it allows first-time buyers to contribute up to $8,000 per year, up to a lifetime maximum of $40,000, with contributions that are tax-deductible and growth that is tax-free. It is the most structurally favorable savings tool for first-time buyers that has existed in Canada in decades. Most people eligible for it are not using it. They don't know it exists. They're still reading articles about coffee. They are separating the decision to build liquidity from the decision to buy a home. $20,000 in a high-interest savings account or a TFSA is not a down payment. Not even close in this market, but it is a foundation. It is the thing that lets you stop reacting to every financial emergency and start making choices from a position that isn't desperation. And in this environment, the difference between someone who has $20,000 in savings and someone who doesn't is not primarily a difference in wealth. It's a difference in options. They are also doing something that sounds obvious but is genuinely hard. They are adjusting their timeline and their geography. The people who are buying homes are increasingly not buying in the cities where they were born. They are moving to markets where the price-to-income ratio is closer to something a human being can actually achieve. They are buying smaller. They are buying with others. Co-ownership arrangements between friends or siblings, things that would have seemed unusual a generation ago, are becoming a real strategy, not a fallback. None of this is the answer your uncle gave you. None of it looks like his story. And that is okay. That is actually the point. His story was true, for him. In that decade, in those conditions. The map he's handing you is not wrong, it just doesn't match the territory anymore. Here is what is true about your generation, stated plainly. Most Gen Y and Gen Z Canadians in major urban centers will not buy a home the way their parents bought a home. Not because they failed, because the mechanism that made that pathway accessible was specific to a particular period of housing policy, wage growth, and debt levels that no longer exists. The window was open, it is now significantly narrower, and telling people to squeeze harder is not the same as acknowledging that the window changed. What you do with that information is in the end up to you. Some people will find ways to adapt, smaller homes, different cities, different timelines, different ownership structures. Some people will build enough liquid wealth that the question of ownership starts to matter less than they thought it would. Some people will continue waiting for the market to correct in a way that makes 1990 ratios possible again. That correction may not come, but here's the thing that matters most, the thing underneath all the numbers. When you understand that you are not failing a test of character, when you understand that the difficulty is structural and not personal, something changes. Not in your bank account, in your head, you stop carrying the weight of a story that was never yours to carry. You stop spending energy on shame about a gap that was never about your choices, and you start spending that energy on the actual question, which is not, why can't I do what my parents did? The actual question is, given the ground I'm actually standing on, what is the most intelligent next move from here? That question has answers. They are different answers than the ones your uncle would give you. They are harder in some ways and more honest in every way. But they are yours, and they are real. The dinner table conversation probably won't change. Your uncle will still mean well. The advice will still be the advice, but you will hear it differently now, not with resentment. Just with clarity, the map he's handing you is real. It led him somewhere true. It just wasn't drawn for where you're standing. And where you're standing is where you have to start. There is one more thing worth saying before this ends. And it is not about housing prices, it is not about savings accounts or down payments or the FHSA or any specific number. It is about something quieter than all of that. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying hard at the wrong problem. Not the exhaustion of effort. That kind of tiredness has a clean feeling to it, the feeling of having spent yourself on something real. This is a different kind, the kind that comes from running and looking up and realizing the finish line has been moving. That exhaustion doesn't just live in your body. It lives in the way you talk about the future, in the slight hesitation before you answer when someone asks where you see yourself in 10 years, in the way the word eventually has started to do a lot of work in your sentences. Eventually, I'll have savings. Eventually, I'll feel stable. Eventually, things will start to make sense. That word, eventually, is what financial scarcity sounds like when it becomes a worldview. And the first step out of it is not a savings account, it is not a budget spreadsheet, it is this: understanding that the exhaustion is not a character flaw. It is a rational response to genuinely difficult conditions. You are not tired because you are weak. You are tired because you have been carrying a weight that was never described to you accurately, and you have been doing it while being told the weight doesn't exist. Once you name the weight correctly, something shifts. Not everything, not immediately, but something. The generation before yours built wealth in a period when the instruments of wealth building were more evenly distributed. Not equally, not fairly, but more evenly. A union job with a pension, a home that appreciated because the city grew. A university degree that cost a fraction of what it costs now and opened doors that now require graduate degrees to reach. Those instruments are still available to some people, but the distribution has narrowed. And the advice that was calibrated for a wider distribution is not wrong. It is just aimed at a different target than the one you're standing in front of. What this generation is building, slowly, differently, with fewer guarantees, is something that doesn't have a clean name yet. It looks like smaller wins held more tightly. It looks like $10,000 in a TFS, treated with the same seriousness that a previous generation treated a mortgage payment. It looks like choosing a city based on what's actually achievable there rather than where you happen to grow up. It looks like two people combining not just income, but strategy. It looks like less ownership and more optionality. It looks like a lot of things that don't fit neatly into the story of what financial success is supposed to look like. But it is real, and it is being built. Quietly, in spreadsheets and savings accounts and conversations between people who are finally saying out loud what they've been thinking alone for years. You are probably one of those people. If you've watched this far, you almost certainly are. The ground shifted, the advice didn't keep up, and you have spent years in the gap between those two facts trying to figure out what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, you just needed a more accurate map. Now you have one.
If this story changed the way you see money, subscribe for more deep story about finance, power, and the system behind it.